So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this session. A session on learning, teaching and working after 2020. If you reflect on where we are today, you know, we are experiencing the greatest education emergency of all times. The COVID-19 pandemic has really disrupted education of over 90% of our world students. And it's accelerating actually the existing inequalities in terms of, and caused by the learning crisis. And as a consequence, there's a whole generation, a future generation at risk. But if we reflect on this, education obviously is a victim of the pandemic. At the same time, it's also a solution to long-term recovery. Mm-hmm. Today, I'm delighted to have two people from the Education Commission with me, who I will introduce shortly. But for those of you who are not familiar with the Education Commission, this was initially convened in 2015 by a number of ministers and foreign ministers from Norway, Chile, Indonesia, Malawi, but also the former director of the UNESCO, Mrs. Bokova. And the UN Special Envoy for Global Education, Mr. Gordon Brown, serves as the chair of the Commission. So today I'd like to introduce you to Lisbeth Stier, who is the director of the Education Commission, and Ju Ho Lee, who is the commissioner of the Education Commission, and he's also the former Minister of Education from South Korea. So thank you for joining the session today. Thank you for your time and your willingness to share your perspective on what's happening in the world. So I'd like to start with a couple of questions. First, a couple of introduction questions, and then we talk about more work and EdTech. But let me start actually with an exciting campaign that has been launched, a campaign called Save Our Future, led by the Education Commission. And Lisbeth, could you share a little bit about what this campaign is all about?
Yes, thank you, Nick, and it's a great pleasure to be here today, also with our great champion, Dr. Ju Ho Lee. The Save Our Future campaign started shortly after COVID hit, because there was a real concern that in the understandable attention to health and the economic impact of the pandemic, that there was too little attention being paid to the crisis in education. And you were very eloquently earlier laying out how deep that crisis is. So the Save Our Future campaign is a coalition of international education actors, including UNESCO, UNICEF, UNHCR, WFP, the World Food Programme, Global Partnership for Education, Education Cannot Wait, and so on. The World Bank is part of it, and the Education Commission, as well as some major civil society organizations. And this group of actors came together to try and unify the sector and ensure that the building of resilient and equitable education systems would be part of this building back better and the COVID-19 recovery strategy. So the way we've been working together is to try and produce what we call a white paper, which includes the main strategies and the priority actions that governments and development partners and civil society have to take in the next 6 to 24 months to avoid exacerbating the existing learning crisis and support the building back better.
Yeah, no, thanks, Elizabeth. So I think it sounds very exciting to me that a number of key global players here come together and think about the future of education, not just what needs to happen over the next 6 months, but also a longer-term perspective, and how can we align actually all the forces and all the resources to have an impact. Mm-hmm. can you share something about, some of the facts, some of the findings so far, Elizabeth, when it comes to education globally?
Yes. So the report, and you make a very good point actually about, this is a paper that actually is not just about the immediate, but also the longer term. It talks about immediate actions in the next 6 to 24 months, but it is about sowing the seeds for building these better systems. And the reason why we need these better systems is, first of all, the fact that we have an incredible and a very deep and often not well understood learning crisis. So before COVID hit, more than half of the world's children could not read at age 10. So simple text, when they were given a simple text, they were not able to read it. That's called learning poverty. So more than 50% of all children were learning poor, and that's in the developing world. And as a result of COVID-19, another 10% will be added to that. So we will have more than 60% of all children in the developing world will not be able to read at age 10. In addition, obviously, we've all heard the numbers on 1.6 billion all children and students around the world have been affected by school closures. And there are millions of children who are at risk of never returning to school after those school closures. The second big issue we're facing is an issue of finance. And the sector, education sector, as a big public sector, has always struggled to get the resources it needs. Unfortunately, the pandemic is making that also that much worse. And there are several factors here. One is, of course, the collapse of economic prosperity and growth, which leads to less government revenues and therefore less spending. Yeah. The second also is that many households are hurting. And in many of the developing countries, actually a large part of education is funded by households. So we also have falling household budgets and loss of spending there. And then finally, the international community, because it is so needing to focus on other things, and rich countries themselves are contracting economically, their own aid flows are also collapsing. So taking all these factors together, UNESCO now estimates that in the coming 10 years, we could have an annual financing gap of $170 to $190 billion per year in these low and middle income countries. And you can compare that with today, a spending level of about 15 billion coming from the international community. So we have a huge issue with financing. And then the final fact that became quite clear and was somewhat unexpected in all of this is that in the beginning, when the schools were closed, there was this sense that maybe this is the moment for education where technology is finally going to be playing a big role. But unfortunately, what we found is that more than 30% of all children cannot be reached by any type of technology, and that actually about 500 million children around the world are not able to be taught by digital means, or whether they don't have the infrastructure or the policies are not in place. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of progress as well. And so in this area particularly, and we'll talk about it later, there are some things that we can do immediately, and then there are things we can do to set ourselves up for a new way of doing business and for truly harnessing technology in education.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, so I'm reflecting indeed. It's kind of, on the one hand, I also assume that in the, let's say, the more richer countries, there's still an awareness gap when it comes to, what are the challenges in education globally, right? So that's one thing. And then, of course, how do you, raise funding and allocate actually the right amounts to, the schools, the countries who have the most need of learning. And also interesting, as you shared, actually the challenge with technology. On the one hand, an enabler for accelerating, learning, but at the same time, if people don't have access to the technology, it's very challenging.
Yeah.
Now, this also gets me to a little bit, a lot of schools have made big changes over the last 6-7 months when it comes to teaching, pedagogy, and also learning. What are some of the highlights that you have noticed when it comes to the changing nature of teaching and learning, Lisbeth?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we have discovered, which seems obvious, but I think the pandemic has brought this to the front much more clearly, is that education and schooling, or schools, public learning spaces, are really at the heart of communities. And that they are truly very important for communities. And in fact, coming out of the pandemic, we may even come with models where, and there's some experts already discussing this, where maybe schools would be driving communities.
Yeah.
So the realization that the schools are not only a center for learning, but they are also important for nutrition, because many children get their school meals and their nutrition in schools. They're a place of safety. They're a place of socio-emotional support, and so on. On the feeding in particular, for example, I was highlighting earlier that the World Food Programme is one of the partners in this effort, and they won the Nobel Peace Prize last week. They have been working very hard to basically keep up school meals because there are millions of children going hungry. And so schools as sites of nutrition and combating hunger is one important aspect. And then just generally the importance of schools in the life of communities and parents. And I think particularly on the role of parents as well as communities, the role that they play in making sure that children can learn, that children are safe, that they feel they are supported, has come out really clearly. And there's been a lot of work that is currently done in terms of partnerships between community health and social welfare organizations and schools, media companies working with education leaders, local nonprofits trying to do all sorts of things to help children learn. So I think that is, to me, probably one of the most important and actually encouraging outcomes of this dreadful crisis.
Yeah. So reflecting on this, Lisbeth, so the overall picture is, it's like we are at the beginning of a huge, education crisis. We have learned already quite a bit about the role of schools and the role of education for children, and the different functions that education and school have beyond actually just, the knowledge acquisition and the learning. So one of my questions is, you've been working on this white paper. So what needs to happen actually? So what are the recommendations in order to tackle the challenges that are ahead of us?
Yeah. Quite a lot needs to happen, but we have the tools available to do this. The white paper actually sets out 7 key action areas, and we can talk about a couple of them later, but basically they are focused on, first of all, and these action areas are really trying to get at what do we need to do right now to address the crisis, and then obviously, as I said earlier, getting the foundations ready for a transformation. So first of all, there needs to be a clear focus on how we can reopen the schools as soon as possible. But obviously we need to be able to do it safely. I think the crisis has shown that the schools are really critical to everything we do, because if children are not in school, parents can't work, and there are many sort of effects, not only on their own learning, but the wider society. So instead of focusing on maybe opening restaurants, we should really focusing on open schools and making sure that they are safe. On the safety, one of the key recommendations we have in the paper is that teachers and educators should be considered frontline workers, which means that they should have priority access to vaccines and protective materials so they can really safely also receive the children and create a safe environment. The second important action that needs to be taken is that we need to make education adaptive. And that is that the importance of this is that when children will be coming back to school, they will come back with different learning levels. We already knew this before, but we have way too much standardized our learning approaches. Now is the moment to really work on creating learning models that are adaptive and that meet children at the level they are. Otherwise, we will have a learning gap that can never be closed. Yeah. Thirdly, we need to strengthen the education workforce and build teams of professionals to deliver learning. And that gets to the point of the fact that we have communities and parents and healthcare professionals, as well as teachers, working together to deliver learning. Fourthly, we need to focus on education technology, but on certain ways of doing that, focusing on the most equitable approaches and making sure no one gets left behind. We can talk about that later. And then there are three more recommendations that relate to protecting spending and mobilizing more resources and using those resources much more carefully.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So it's a whole list on big things to execute on for governments, for schools, communities, etc. So it requires indeed a lot of collaboration and people who are behind the vision that you have forward related to this. What I like to do is to dig in a little bit more in terms of workforce and educational technologies. And one question, and you were touching a little bit on this already, but what have we learned about the role of teachers, Elizabeth, during this COVID crisis?
One is, of course, that teachers are absolutely super important. There are certain things we knew already, but I think the crisis has made that so much more evident. So, and teachers have really tried so many new ways of bringing the learning and the tools to help children learn even when things were closed down. But at the same time, as I was saying earlier, we realize that teachers cannot act alone, and that we need a combination of professionals to deliver learning. That means families, communities, health professionals. It means also leadership at all levels of the system, whether they're school leaders or district leaders or government leaders. In a way, all of these people need to work together in what we call learning teams with the child at the center. So we kind of maybe need to move from a model where we have children all focusing on the teacher from that model to a model where we have a set of professionals all focusing on the child. And that doesn't mean that obviously teachers haven't focused on children, they have, but it's all these other professionals that also need to be really focused on the child and the learning of the child.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. So I'd like to go to Ju Ho, as I mentioned, commissioner and former Minister of Education of South Korea. If you think about, teaching and learning, beyond COVID, if there's any kind of beyond COVID, right? So a lot of people even asking if that will be the case at one point in time, but also related to the UN SDG goals, they will end by 2030. So what do you think what needs to happen more on a macro level when we think about the role of teachers in the whole education process?
Mm-hmm. So I think we are witnessing a sea change in education after COVID-19, as every schools should introduce online learning within school or outside the school, regardless whether they are ready or not because of pandemic. So this is really big change that requires a lot of resources, ranging from internet connectivity, digital devices, and learning platforms, contents, as well as teachers well trained for those changes. So this is really a daunting challenges, not just for educators, but for policymakers. One important point I'd like to make is that we really do need a very comprehensive approach, not just education only, but we really have to think about providing a better infrastructure, for example, internet connectivity to especially for school children. So we can design a big mega project targeting students, but bringing in a lot of players, public or private, that can change the level of infrastructure, level of digital device usages, level of the learning platforms and so forth. So, this could be the precondition for teachers to make a transformative change, because that after pandemic, people realize that if you are forced to be out of school, you can see the real school very clearly. Right? School is not just place of exams and test taking, but the places of high touch human connections. So students meeting friends there, teachers playing mentoring roles there. So at the same time, we are forced to use online learning tools, and we found it very not well ready. Despite the great potential, technological potential they have, the education technology has not been successfully penetrated into the classroom and the learning places. So we really have to nurture the ecosystem where the edutech innovators can work together with educators so that they can develop much advanced technologies that can benefit every children. So these are really big challenges that require a very high priority initiative for the government. When this happens, maybe teachers can be transformed to become kind of a designer of learning environment rather than just a lecturer, because you know that the lecture is not effective anymore after pandemic, right? Yeah. So we really think about different roles of a teacher who can provide more human connections, as well as learning opportunity, not based on lecture, but based on much advanced technologies like AI tutoring system and so forth.
Now, thanks, Juho. I can't agree more when it comes to the infrastructure, having access to the right technology, actually, but also the quality of the let's say, the digital learning. And I can share one example from myself. I have founded a foundation more than 15 years ago. It's called E-Learning for Kids. And we have developed digital learning for children between 5 and 12 on math and science. And we make it available on the internet for free. But also we are in touch with many schools around the world who don't have internet. And where basically we install the courseware on their computers. And one of the things that we have learned is that, you know, the role of the teacher is incredibly important to help the children in a classroom, to walk around, give some advice how to do certain things. And, you know, the technology will not replace the teacher. It's the opposite. I think it's enabling the teacher to be more effective. And my last comment on that is too, you refer to this, it's also the quality of the pedagogy. I think the technology is one thing, but you know, you need to apply, you know, the best pedagogy based on the latest insights, how children learn and how you can design very effective digital learning programs. And the foundation has reached 20 million children, and this year even, you know, a lot of more children. And still, to the point that Elizabeth made at the beginning, there's still a lot of children in the world who do not have access to a computer in school or at home, or there's no internet, etc. So we still have a significant gap. So I one question, Lisbeth, when we think about, you know, children are highly impacted, students are highly impacted by this crisis. And of course, there always are children even more impacted than other children who are more marginalized in their countries. So what do countries need to do to provide effective teaching to those who are the most vulnerable in their countries?
Yes, this is the kind of big question, because what we do not want is to have the pandemic worsen the inequities that we already were facing in the world. And at the moment, it does look like it is doing that very much. So we need to absolutely zero in on trying to get to these children who are furthest behind. And there are several ways one can do that. First, it's really important that we get the data to help us make decisions. And in many systems, that data has not always been focused on helping either teachers or leaders make decisions. It's being focused on filling or fulfilling some kind of administrative requirements, some kind of counting effort. So we need to use data in a really smart way to help us address the needs of children. GIS analysis, for example, can be really helpful here. We've been working with Sierra Leone, for example, where the use of geographic information and sort of the mapping of distances between schools show that in a third of schools where there was a subject specialist missing, they could actually use someone from a nearby school. So just kind of mapping out the availability of the workforce, for example, and map that towards the needs of the children is really important and can help us move forward. So when we think about data, it's not just about the testing. People always think about that, but data can be used in so many ways to help us improve our delivery. And then the second part is obviously the professional development. Reaching marginalized children really requires a very adaptive approach. It requires that we focus on really the levels that those furthest behind are at. And then we train teachers and we train education professionals to have a very interactive pedagogy. And that is, and Duho can talk to this later, that's also where technology could potentially play a huge role. But we need to create the, either we need to first focus on making sure that the workforce does actually or is able to deliver that interactive and adaptive pedagogy. And then that we also go and look how we can use technology to amplify that. And I very much agree with you. It's not about replacing teachers, it's about changing the way we act. And then finally, reaching marginalized children will often require bringing people into the workforce in areas or in parts of the world where the availability of professional teachers is not great. So we need to look for alternative pathways to bring teachers into the workforce or bring educators into the workforce so they can serve these most underserved and marginalized areas.
Well, thanks, Elizabeth. I think it's wonderful insights and recommendations in terms of how to have an impact. And I hope actually and want to be optimistic actually that indeed we can make big steps actually towards that. If I reflect on the role of the teachers in schools, the education workforce. There's a lot what they need to do differently if we look ahead. And how, if you reflect on that and in terms of what kind of leadership is needed to ensure that the education workforce is indeed resilient and are able to adapt to future needs.
You know that we really do need a transformative leadership. Especially in this challenging period, because teachers are required to work together with community workers for providing better mentoring and social emotional learning opportunities. And at the same time, teachers are required to work together with edutech innovators to utilize much advanced technologies, maybe AI-assisted technologies like intelligent tutoring system and so forth, so that especially as Elizabeth pointed out, the vulnerable students should not be left behind because of the pandemic. So this requires a big challenge. So the leaders should be able to launch quite ambitious and transformative project, maybe a mega project that can bring in public and private stakeholders, multiple stakeholders, including network companies, global IT companies, and the better the learning platform and content providers to help teachers particularly, so that they can reach out every child for better learning. So this is this requires a big efforts by the leader to bring in many players, not just confined to educators, but the community leaders, IT company leaders, so that they can work together to provide better learning solutions and tools for every student.
Thanks, Juho. When we reflect on, skills needed in the 21st century, it's evolving, it's changing fast. And Elizabeth, you also were referring to the digital divide in a way that on the one hand is access to technology, but it's also about, digital literacy, right? So key is, of course, for children and students to understand math and reading and writing, etc. But also, if you miss out on all the digital skills, that's also a huge challenge. So, so one of the questions I have is, if we think how the role of the education workforce, what do they need to do to adopt actually to new skills that children, that students need to learn for the 21st century?
Well, it actually goes back to the vision of the learning team, and it's not surprising that actually some of those 21st century skills are exactly about collaboration and communication. Yeah. As much as teachers need to bring those skills to students, they also need to practice them amongst themselves and in these learning teams. So the learning teams that bring together all these professionals are going to have to collaborate more and exchange more information about what's needed, and that includes obviously the private sector as well. Yeah. This is one of the issues I think that we've struggled with, is that in many places children leave school with skills that are not actually useful for the labor market. So there needs to be this collaborative structure within the education sector and with the education sector and other sectors to try and really build and develop the skills that are needed. And quite surprisingly, this kind of approach has been much less common in education. It seems second nature to other sectors. Obviously, if you think about the health sector, when you need a health intervention, you are met with a number of professionals that will be delivering the health service to you. The same in early childhood development, for example. We have different type of professionals that come together. Obviously, in the private sector, companies, corporations, they only thrive if they have a team-based approach. And that is exactly what we would like to instill in the education sector as well. And the Education Commission has been working on this education workforce initiative. And Juho Lee has been a wonderful leader of that initiative to really assess around the world where has this approach already been implemented and where is it working, and making sure that we can assess the effectiveness of these approaches is really important to enable us to then share the learning amongst ourselves on how to do this best. And what we advocate for is that not only do we create these teams of learning around the child, but we also create learning systems. So within the system, we will have evidence and data on how this can work, and then it is fed back to inform us all to do better. So we move from kind of the standardized approach that has had one teacher in front of a classroom to an approach where we have learning teams, people working together to deliver learning within learning systems, where there's a constant kind of flow of information, data, and evidence on the effectiveness of what we are doing.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. What I really like, what you're saying is the whole idea of these learning teams, and also, students, collaborating and learning in teams. And one of the reasons is that, if we look at a number of the reports that have been published on the skills of the future, and also reflecting on the fact that we are at the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution, and over the next 10 years there will be significant change in roles in the labor market. I always argue that we will never win it as humans from machines in tasks, in activities that the machine is good at. So therefore, we need to think about what are the things as humans are unique. And it comes back to collaboration, critical thinking, ideation, problem solving, but also learning. And I think that in teams, supporting by teams and learning in teams is a very powerful way to develop those capabilities for students. So, I was wondering, Juho, from a government perspective, what kind of advice do you have for governments around the world? How can they support the education workforce and as Elizabeth mentioned, learning teams to build back better? What do you recommend actually?
Yeah. So one important idea related to education workforce is that, as we already discussed, the education technology can support teachers, not replace teachers. And also, we do really need the students, they should be taught to become more creative, more collaborative, and so forth. And the memorizing and understanding knowledge is not the major part of learning anymore, right? That can be better done by AI and so forth. So in that context, I actually worked with Elizabeth in team to put, to explore the high touch, high tech learning model. We call high touch, high tech because when we embrace adaptive learning technology provided by intelligent tutoring system, then teachers can better focus on high touch learning, making students focusing on collaboration, the communication, creativity, and critical thinking, because teachers can relieve from the burden of teaching students to understand and memorize, because that part can be better done by AI tutor. So this is quite a bold model, but we really want to test this new model can be applicable to the developing country context. So we started high touch, high tech prototype project in Vietnam. The Education Commission team had an excellent job in inviting Arizona State University experts and also one of global vendor who can provide intelligent tutoring system in mathematics. And we work together with the Ministry of Education Training of Vietnam, supported by DeepFit in UK. And we actually made a global action to test high touch, high tech learning model. And we really found a very impressive outcome. The standard deviation, 0.44 standard deviation increase was observed for those who have been treated by the high touch, high tech learning model in 4 Vietnam schools. So this is, I think, one of the example how we can turn big idea into global action. You know, that we have already had a lot of discussions and experiments about new learning models. And now it's really high time that we have to take global action, particularly because the threat by the pandemic really accelerate the learning inequality, learning poverty that mentioned by Elizabeth. And so we really have to be able to design a big project, a global project, to explore new learning models, embracing high-tech learning technologies, and at the same time, encouraging teachers transform their roles.
Yeah. No, thank you. So, so the technology is very promising, and as you mentioned, I think there's a lot what governments can do to help each other, to showcase
Exactly.
what's working actually. So going hand in hand and make education indeed a global topic that needs to be addressed versus only in my own country, and learn from each other, right?
Yeah, exactly. So let me just add a few points. So after the successful prototype project in Vietnam, we were encouraged by many to increase the number of schools covered by this new idea. But we soon found out that if we really want to expand the size of new learning model schools, we do need a kind of comprehensive approach, because we have to include rural Vietnam school, which doesn't have any internet connectivity, And also we do need a local learning platform and contents that cannot be provided by international vendor. So this really requires a big project, and it cannot be provided by domestic providers alone. So that really make the global action necessary for many countries so that they can address their challenges.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for sharing this. And Elizabeth, reflecting, asking you to think about EdTech. What's the potential of EdTech kind of short term? The next 6 to 12 months. What can we do with EdTech?
Yes, and I think the thing is that it will vary. It depends on where we are. And obviously in a country like Korea, there are incredible opportunities to use EdTech in a student-facing way. In developing countries, however, in the immediate term, the kind of student-facing platforms may be I won't say less useful, they're less feasible because the infrastructure isn't there. And there are all these aspects, as Juho was mentioning, that kind of the comprehensiveness of the system isn't in place to really start rolling out these student-facing approaches writ large across developing countries. So the way we in the white paper also emphasize this issue is saying, first of all, obviously, we know where we need to head to. We need to head in the direction that Juho was describing. But in order to get there, we need to lay some foundations, and that's what we work on right now. The foundations are, one, that we need to use technology for data and the procurement of data, as I was mentioning earlier, to help kind of make decisions and know where children are, what their needs are, how we can address them. In fact, there are very good examples around the world where this has really helped move forward. There is a program in Kenya, for example, the Some program that many are familiar with, that really use high quality data to enable teachers to adapt quickly to the needs of the children and adapt their teaching models. So we say, first of all, strengthen the systems and the education data and use technology for that. Secondly, perhaps in those cases where we still need to put infrastructure in place to reach children, there may be an opportunity to use available infrastructure to reach the teachers first. So instead of saying, let's roll out online learning for all students, see what the potential of that is first in terms of reaching the teachers, because they need the support right now to change the way they teach and to adapt to these incredible circumstances they are facing. So one really important recommendation we have is, let's not forget about the teachers. As we're all excited about trying to get platforms to children, really focus on professional development and use technology for that professional development. So change the approach that teachers have, which could be consistent with technology being introduced in the classroom later, but make sure that we can help them first and foremost. And there are, again, amazing examples around the world of the use of tech for teachers also to collaborate. So in refugee camps, you have literally groups of teachers that are working together using even simple tools like WhatsApp or other platforms to exchange information, to exchange kind of instructional materials and so on. So that's an important enhanced teacher and workforce development. And then thirdly, obviously, we really need to look at the use of technology for those really furthest behind, where perhaps even there is no other option. So in the case of reaching disabled, visually impaired children, we really need to zero in on them. If we use kind of student-facing technology, let's really focus on those who really need it most right now. And all of that will set us up to get ready for the big prize, which is the one that Juho is describing, of the high-tech, high-touch approach. And there are amazing advances being made in countries around the installation of infrastructure. And I have no doubt that very quickly we will be in an era where we have the technology available, but we're going to have to work with those providers right now with mobile technology and Wi-Fi and so on to make sure that they include schools as they are rolling out systems in to help economies. It's not so much about the education system, but just to help the economy cope with COVID-19, that we make sure that as these investors come in to expand their networks, that they think about education and that they think about education systems. And so that's what we need to focus on to lay the foundation to then really have the big transformation.
Yeah, thanks.
Let me just, talk about the Korean experience supporting the Elizabeth's viewpoint. That, that in 1970s, when Korea pushed toward heavy and chemical industry, what government did was not just the industrial policy to introduce new industries, but more importantly, Korean government introduced a new vocational education system. So that at that time, CAD/CAM machine, computer-aided design and computer-aided manufacturing machines are really cutting-edge technologies. And you can see those new technologies only in vocational schools in Korea, not universities, not government. So they prioritize introducing new technologies in schools in advance of any other places. So when we transform our economy, we really prioritize educating skilled workers. When this can be related to the responses toward COVID-19, as Elizabeth pointed out, we really prioritize education when we respond to COVID-19. So, for example, when we really have to boost the economy, that we can first launch a new big project of making every school to be equipped with the internet network and also students with devices. There could be a huge economic boost the project as well as education project.
Yeah, no, thank you. I can't agree more. And thank you for sharing the examples, Juho, and also Elizabeth. I can't agree more in terms of the role of the teacher when we think about technology, and also reflecting on my own experience with my foundation e-learning for kids, that initially there are teachers who are scared if technology will be used, because their initial thinking is, well, maybe I will lose my job. Or maybe I don't have the skills myself to use this. It will require a very different way of teaching and facilitating learning. But also what I've seen that's also very exciting is that the teachers who came on board and have embraced actually the digital learning, they have been doing really well and they have been flourishing in their jobs more than ever before. So tremendous opportunities ahead of us. So short term, longer term. So what about longer term, Elizabeth, when you think about the role of and the success of EdTech?
Well, I think it's all about what Juho was describing earlier, that we need to get the environment ready for this. We need to make sure that the infrastructure is in place. We also need to make sure that governments have policies in place and regulatory frameworks that allow us to expand EdTech. There are obviously issues with privacy as well, and the treatment of data that comes from these systems. And then there is also the need to educate the workforce to make sure that they can use it, etc., etc. So I think that the long-term success of EdTech in the wonderful way described by Juho, the high-touch, high-tech is actually in many ways about many things that aren't about the technology. It is about getting the whole environment ready to harness and to embrace technology, and that includes importantly the high touch part. So focusing the teachers on the high touch, and wonderfully the high touch is exactly also that piece that is so much needed now in the workforce. When you talk about these 21st century skills, that is actually, that part is really what is needed. And if teachers, we can get teachers to really focus on that and use the technology to help with the knowledge transfer and so on, I think we would be on a totally new trajectory. So much to do.
I can't agree more. And yeah, back to the high touch. I think also, when we think about mental health, because of the crisis that we are in and challenges that parents have and families have to cope actually with the crisis, and anything that teachers can do also to help actually children from a mental health perspective, of course, is also a high touch example of that will have a huge impact potentially. I have one last question for Ju Ho. What can governments do and other actors in the system to harness the power of technology for teaching and learning beyond 2020? So looking ahead the next 5-10 years, what do you recommend government and other key players to do?
So rather than just giving recommendation, actually I help establish Education Commission Asia with the assistance from Education Commission headquarters led by Elizabeth. And so we actually started some ambitious projects that can address those issues we just discussed. So we first started university consortium, and where universities can work together to embrace new technologies, particularly AI tutoring system, intelligent tutoring system, so that we bring in ASU experts to learn about those new technologies. So now 15 universities started their new high-touch, high-tech courses next semester. So it is a big change, and it was galvanized by the Education Commission efforts. We actually experimented already in Vietnam. So I explained what we have done in Vietnam, and I explained presidents of universities, and they started quite the bold the projects, partly due to the pandemic, because they need to find out new solutions. So it has made us very, very popular among university innovators. So our membership has increased from 15, now expected to increase to 30 soon. So maybe it can become a big consortium that can really help see change in higher education. So my observation is that the university innovators can go first. And then what we did next is to focus on the disadvantaged students in K-12 schools. You know that teachers, as you pointed out, somewhat afraid of embracing new technologies. Maybe this is really new and not really comfortable utilizing it, and some afraid of losing their jobs, right? So what we did was to focus on disadvantaged students. For example, we have students from the North Korean defector families. So they really need a good education, really tailored to their different levels of prior knowledge and so forth. So intelligent tutoring system turned out to be very effective, and they also help teachers there to focus on mentoring, which are really required for those students with traumas and so forth. So soon after the beginning of the new program, it has been really become very, very satisfactory. So I was very encouraged by this success, early success. So you know that this is the example how global organization can affect local initiatives. So I really been more confident about turning this kind of big idea into global action. It can benefit Korean students. Why not students the other place?
Thank you for sharing your insights here too. Yeah, so a lot of people have been watching, listening to our conversation today, and Elizabeth, if people ask themselves like, okay, is there anything I can do, right? So personally, professionally, with regards to this huge challenge that we are in the middle of today in terms of education globally, any advice?
I think, first of all, if you are interested in being part of this movement, contact us because as the Education Commission, we are convinced that this task is so challenging that none of us can do this alone. And so joining into existing efforts or new efforts is really very important. And we are from the Education Commission side and also with the Education Commission Asia Hub, we are really looking for people who want to engage on any of the topics that we have discussed today. And there are so many ways to engage at a national or at a global level. And obviously, I think the COVID-19 crisis has made it clear that every one of us can play a role in our own communities and do something to help make schools and make learning really the center of what we do. So I really hope that people will be encouraged by this conversation. Well, it seems like we have huge challenges ahead of us, but we also have some incredible energy and solutions, and we can't emphasize enough that we are opening our arms to anybody who wants to be part of this.
Okay, thanks, Lisbeth. So I want to thank everyone for listening today to this session, and hopefully you indeed will connect with the Education Commission to see if you can contribute and help with this huge challenge that we have ahead of us. I want to thank Joo-Ho Lee for being with us today, for your examples related to government, education technologies, etc., and also for all the work you're doing. And the same for Elizabeth for also sharing, the challenges and the path forward and how everybody can be part of this. So thank you for your time, for sharing your insights, but more for your passion to have an impact on the world, because that's what education does. Wish you all well, and hopefully we will stay in touch.
Yes,
Thank you very much.